back to the green letters this week, I want to start with a question. What was the bloodiest event in the 20th century? You're likely thinking of something like World War II. Maybe you're thinking of the Vietnam War. You'd be wrong on both accounts by many magnitudes. The bloodiest event of the 19th century was the Russian Revolution. It's a fascinating thing. How it starts was the promise that it was never delivered on. The Smithsonian's got an interesting TV show right now on the Russian Revolution. The caption, it says, is peace, land, and bread. That's the slogan of the Russian Revolution, or the Bolshevik Revolution. The idealistic social experiment was doomed from the start. In its first 3 years under Lenin's Bolshevik rule, millions were killed, and within a generation, nearly a third of the world's population lived under the shadow of communism. What's so interesting about this story that I'm telling you is that it had the promise, the Bolshevik Revolution, of taking care of the poor and taking care of the underprivileged, taking care of those who've been overlooked by society, and it led almost immediately into the murder of millions and millions of people, including those it was supposed to care for. By some estimates, 60 million people died through that revolution and the events that followed, far more than died in World War II or anything that Hitler did with the Jews. I tell you that story because it's interesting. Personally, I'm going to tell you another one that works just alongside it. There was a time in my life where I would get up early. I'm all about my morning routine, and I get up early. And the perfect morning was getting up early, maybe 5, Bible time and prayer and exercise and journaling. And by the time 7:30 rolled around, I was waking up the family. But the only problem with that was I was a jerk to the whole family. And Summer came to resent my perfect mornings. What was going on with that? It had the promise I was doing everything right, but it never delivered. We approach this Christian life in much the same way. And Miles Stanford has this to say on page 54 in his chapter on self, which is the chapter we're talking about today. For some years now, the evangelistic scene has been dominated by a conversion known as commitment, which often, sad to say, amounts to little more than spiritual miscarriage. When there is a bit of life, it usually blossoms overnight into full bloom, and it becomes heavy with the fruit of dynamic, radiant personality coupled with busy, rushing service. The tragedy of this sort of thing is that the self is at home and thrives in the glow of it all, and is rarely found out for what it really is. All is indiscriminate hearts and flowers. What's he saying? Well, it's like my perfect morning. It doesn't work out. This commitment to get it all right, somehow I've missed love. So what's the solution? This is a fascinating thing. First of all, he references Romans chapter 7. It's 7:15 and following, and it says, what I do, I don't want to do. What I don't want to do, I do. And what Paul's identifying is the fact that our flesh, when we try and make it right, when we try and do right with our fleshly attempts, it always ends up worse. It always ends up far worse. So then if the flesh cannot be fixed, what happens? God works by paradox on page 56. Success comes via failure. Life springs out of death. The only element in the believer's life that crumbles is that which has to go anyway. The new life can never be harmed or affected. This disintegration is something the believer cannot enter into nor engineer on his own. Self will never cast out self. He has to be led into it by the mercy of the Holy Spirit into failure, abject and total. For we which live are always delivered unto the death for Jesus' sake, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our mortal flesh. 2 Corinthians 4:11. So often the means utilized by the Spirit is an unsaved mate or even a saved one. Oh, poor health, yes, and good health too. 1,001 things are used by him. In fact, everything to bring out in us the worst, ultimately enabling us to see that the Christian life has to be not I, but Christ. What's his point? And your flesh will never be fixed aside. The only thing that can happen is it has to be crucified with Christ. We don't fix the flesh. We come to failure with the flesh, and that failure lifts our eyes to Jesus in dependence. Holy Spirit, please fill me and live through me. I can't be disciplined and discipline myself into holiness. I can't rely on my flesh to do that. I need your presence, and I need you. May that be your prayer this week. Talk to you next week, guys.